In regards to the Me'il, the Pasuk says, V'asiso al shulav, on the bottom of the Me'il, you'll make rimoine tcheles, pomegranates made of wool dyed with tcheles, as well as palmoines of golden bells, besoicham soviv. We're going to see in a moment what besoicham soviv means. So Rashi explains that even though the rimoinim, these pomegranates, were round and hollow inside, the meaning of palmoines of besoicham, that there were palmoines of these golden bells, does not mean that the palmoinim were inside the actual rimoinim, the hollow of those rimoinim. Rather, it means they were between the rimoinim. Between each two pomegranates, there was one bell hanging at the bottom edge of the me'il. The Ramban asks, according to Rashi's pshat, it would seem that the rimoinim, these pomegranates, don't have any use. In other words, it's not that the bells are inside the pomegranate, so what's the point of these pomegranates? If they were just there, just for beauty, just as a design, then why is it made like hollow pomegranates? Why not like golden apples? The Mizrahi, this is one of the Mefarshim on Rashi, Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi, asks on the Ramban, why is he saying apples? In what way are apples better than pomegranates? Mefarshim explained that what's bothering the Ramban actually is the detail, the aspect of the fact that they're hollow. In other words, if the bells are not hanging inside of the rimoinim, why are they hollow, these pomegranates? However, the Rebbe says the question still remains, if the Ramban's question is only on the fact that they are hollow, then why does he even mention the point that they are pomegranates rather than apples? Why is he changing it from pomegranates back to apples? He's saying there should be golden apples. What's the point of apples instead of pomegranates? The Rebbe says, seemingly we would be able to explain that we find in regards to the menorah that for that part of the design, for the beauty of the menorah, there were kaftoirim and prochim. Prochim are flowers. What are kaftoirim? So Rashi explains to us that they were in the shape of apples. So since we see that apples are there for beauty, if according to Rashi, the rimoinim, the pomegranates, are also in the me'il just for beauty, so this is what the Ramban is saying, then they should have been not like pomegranates, they should have been like tapuchim, like apples, similar to the beauty in the menorah where you had these kaftoirim, which were in the shape of an apple. However, the Rebbe says it's still not understood. First of all, we need to understand, why do we say beauty is more associated with apples? And number two, the question is, according to Rashi, what is the reason that by the me'il, that which is for beauty, these rimoinim are in fact rimoinim pomegranates, and by the menorah would be tapuchim, would be apples. The Rebbe says, regarding the point of these bells at the bottom of the me'il, the pasuk says, "V'nishma koiloi bevoyei lakodesh," that the sound of these bells would be heard as the Kohen Gadol approaches, comes into the holiness. And this was so important, it mattered so much for the avodah of the Kohen Gadol, that the pasuk says that as a result of a nishma koiloi, that the sound will be heard. In this way, v'lo yamos, this will cause that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't die. From which we understand, from the negative, we also understand what would be the other way around. That chas v'sholom, if there are no bells, their sound is not there, then we understand what would happen. So we need to understand, why is this so important that the nishma, that the sounding of these bells should be heard, bevoyei lakodesh, when the Kohen Gadol comes into the holiness? Seemingly we know from a pasuk, loy barash Hashem. Hashem does not appear in the midst of a big commotion and noise. That's not what represents Hashem. As the pasuk over there says, koil d'mamodaka, still, soft sound, a very quiet, a quietness. That's what would be more the place for Hashem. And as we see by the Kohen Gadol himself, that when he goes in on Yom Kippur to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there he actually goes in without those special extra clothes, the big dezov, that the Kohen Gadol usually wears. He does not wear the me'il. He does not have those bells on Yom Kippur when he comes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So what is the reason that usually he doesn't need these bells? The Ramban explains that if a person walks into the palace of the king suddenly, unannounced, he's chayev misa. And therefore, these bells were in a certain sense like Netilas Rishus, getting permission, announcing that he's about to go in to do the avodah before actually going in. If that's the case, why is it that on Yom Kippur he doesn't need this method of asking permission, of announcing that he's about to come in? Seemingly you would say, how much more so on Yom Kippur? If he's going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, surely he should be announcing his arrival first. So the reason is, because Yom Kippur, Hashem is showing in an extra special way the Maila of the Yidden, and in that way, he doesn't need, in a certain sense, he's not requiring that there should be a shaliach, an announcer, some sort of bells to announce that the Kohen Gadol is coming, like one would usually do, to send forth a shaliach ahead to announce that he's coming. On Yom Kippur, that's not needed. According to this would come out that the v'nishma koiloi of these bells are not so much part of the avodah itself. It's not an integral part of the avodah. However, it's only more of an introduction, a preparation to the avodah. Says the Rebbe, nevertheless, since we know that everything in connection to the avodah of the Kohen Gadol would be absolutely precise and accurate, especially something that's so serious that we say it would have the death penalty for it, and as we said, the pa'amoinim, these bells, are actually making noise not only before the Kohen Gadol does the avodah, it's also making noise while he's doing the avodah. It makes sense to say, therefore, says the Rebbe, that the v'nishma koili, the sounds that are coming from the me'il, is not only as a preparation for the avodah, but somehow it's very relevant to the avodah itself. Says the Rebbe, one of the explanations goes as follows. The Kohen Gadol is doing his avodah as a shliach of Klal Yisrael. Automatically it means that bevoyah, when he is going into the holiness, he's taking along with him into the holiness, he's taking all of Klal Yisrael into this holiest place. It's understood, and it's explained in a number of places at length, that the avodah of Baalei Tshuva, a Baal Tshuva is coming. What's his avodah? He's coming because he was distant from Hashem. He's running away from the bad. So the avodah of the Baal Tshuva generally is going to be with lots of noise and commotion. Like someone that's running away from a place of danger of death. He's screaming, he's making noise, it's with a big commotion. Says the Rebbe, in a similar way, is the type of avodah really of every single yid. Even if someone that doesn't have any aveiros, Rahman al-Itzlan. That is, if a person should think about how distant he is from Hashem, whether it is because his nefesh habahamis is still strong in full force, and therefore he's a yesh v'davar nifrad, he's a separate entity outside of Elikus, separated from Hashem. Or even if it is that as far as his nefesh alikis, he still feels himself as some sort of entity. Yes, it's an entity of good, entity of kedusha, but still feeling himself as some sort of mitzius, not the absolute bittul, not with absolute nullification. This itself inspires and arouses the person with a koil raj gadol, with a great commotion, with lots of tumult, with lots of noise. He wants to run away from his current situation. In fact, the Rebbe tells a story that the Baal Shem Tov was one time asked why it is that the Hasidim make all sorts of motions while they're davening. And he responded that this is similar to someone that's drowning. He's drowning in the sea, and he's going to make all sorts of hand motions and feet motions and so on, and try to save himself. He's screaming with all his might that he should be rescued, he should be saved. Surely no one's going to laugh, no one's going to mock this person because of all of his movements and all of his commotion. Says the Rebbe, how does this fit with what we said before, Loi barash Hashem, that Hashem is not found in all of the commotion and the noise? So the Rebbe says, the Pasuk says over there, Loi barash Havaya, Shem Havaya, this particular name of Hashem. That is, in order for a person to be a keli, to be a vessel, for Shem Havaya, for this aspect in godliness, which is completely higher than Olam, is higher than the world's, for this, a person needs to have the avodah of koil d'mam madak, of being very, very quiet and silent, which is more the idea of absolute bittul. But when a yid is holding by the avodah of still running away from his yeshus, from his mitzias, from his feeling of self, At the time when he's still up to a level that's more associated with Shem Elokim, Shem Elokim is the one that still allows for some sort of existence to be, this avodah is definitely connected with the rash, with commotion, with tumult, etc. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why the avodah of the Kohen Gadol all year round was in a way of a nishma koilo, where the sound has to be heard as he's coming to the avodah and doing the avodah. Because again, when he comes in, he's taking along with himself into the Kodesh all of the Yidden. All of those Yidden that the Seder of their avodah would be B'koil Rash, as we said, that every Yid feels this idea that he's still distant from Hashem, and the Kohen Gadol is taking all of these Yidden in with them. And this is hinted in the fact that these Palmoinim, these bells, are at the very bottom of the Me'il. What does the bottom mean? In other words, this V'nishma Koile, the sound that's coming from these bells, is connected to the lower levels of the Yidden, or to that aspect of a Yid that's still associated in some way that he's running away from the bad or from Yeshus and trying to get closer to Hashem. Says the Rebbe, this is why it says V'nishma Koile, the sound has to be heard. V'lo yomu, so that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't die. In other words, this is such a crucial part of the Avodah that the whole chayus of the Kohen Gadol is dependent on it. Why? If a Kohen Gadol does not have this V'nishma Koile, if the Kohen Gadol is not including inside of himself those Yidden, which are, so to speak, at the bottom of the Me'il, those that are still holding at this lowly level which they have to run away from, even if it is because he wants to be on a higher level right now, this Kohen Gadol, he wants to be on the avoid of Koil Dmomodaka, that absolute bittul to Hashem, says the Rebbe, that would completely nullify the Metzias of the Kohen Gadol, the life of the Kohen Gadol, along with his avodah. Why? Because the shleimus of Klal Yisrael, the wholesomeness of Klal Yisrael, is dependent when you have the avodah that encompasses all of the Yidden, all Shishim Ribu, all 600,000 neshamas of the Yidden, from the highest to the lowest, from the heads to the wood choppers and the water carriers. Says the Rebbe, this, however, is only the avodah of the Kohen Gadol all year round. When he's going into the Heichal known as the Kodesh, that's where you say that there are different levels of Yidden. There are the higher levels, the lower levels, the wood choppers, the water carriers, and therefore you also have to include the lower levels, and the nishma koila, you have to have the commotion, you have to have the noise for all of those people that are far and trying to get close. But when it comes to the avoid of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, here we say it's going to be without any noise, without any commotion. Because now the Yidden are on the level of Malachim. Now you have the revelation of the absolute essential bond of every single Yid with Hashem. And since every single Yid, even those that are usually associated with the bottom of the Me'il, but on Yom Kippur are standing with the greatest closeness, the greatest unity with Hashem, Yechido Liyakvach. So now, when even the way they come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim through the Kohen Gadol, going and taking them, so to speak, with him, is not like someone that's far getting close and therefore would have to be with all the commotion, but rather all of the Yidden are now standing on that level of absolute bittul, and therefore in a silent and a quiet way. Says the Rebbe, now we'll start understanding the difference between the Ramban and Rashi. The difference why the Ramban is the one that says that if the Rimonim were there just for beauty, why don't you make them apples, golden apples? And Rashi says that no, here we're making, even though it's for beauty, we're using what? We're using Rimonim, we're using pomegranates. What is the difference between an apple and a pomegranate? Generally, when we look through Chazal, we find that the Yidden are compared to both. Yidden are sometimes compared to a tapuach, to an apple. They're also compared to a pomegranate. What is the difference? When we compare them to an apple, it's usually going to be as we're looking at Yidden as when they are on the highest of all levels, on a very great and high level. Rimoin, the pomegranate, on the other hand, represents usually Yidden when they're on a very, very low level. The pasuk says, "Kepelach harimoin rakoseich," being compared to a rimoin, and the Gemara says that the word rimoin over here is referring to Yidden that are rakoseich, they are empty. We're speaking about people that are empty, and yet they are filled with good and kedusha. As the Gemara says over there, that even those that are empty, even those that are so lowly, are yet they're filled with mitzvahs like a rimoin, like a pomegranate. So now, Rashi, which looks at Pshutei Shel Mikra, where Yidden are being seen more on the simple level, the more chitzonius, the external level. So we look at Yidden that are on the bottom of the Me'il, and we look at them that they are like rimoinim, they are empty. And therefore, we need to have Rimoinim specifically, to emphasize the idea that even those people that are empty, or maybe even lower than that, the Gemara says even Poishei Yisrael, even the sinners are filled with mitzvahs like a rimoin. So we say that even these Yidden are also going to be going in with the Kohen Gadol to the holiness, to the Heichal. They are also part of Klal Yisrael, and furthermore, they too are filled with mitzvahs like a rimoin, like a pomegranate. However, the Ramban doesn't only focus on Pshat, but also, as the Ramban himself says, that he also includes all sorts of beautiful ideas that are more associated with those that know Kabbalah, etc. There is more emphasized the Pnimiyus of Yidden. As far as the Pnimiyus of a Yid is concerned, a Yid never has a connection to any sort of sin. The Amech Kulam Tzadikim. And therefore, what does the Ramban say? The Ramban says that v'nishma koiloi, this idea that we needed to hear the sounds of the bells, etc., that's only as a preparation to the avodah that's going to follow from the Kohen Gadol, but not part of the avodah itself. Because the going into the Kodesh, even as a shliach of Klal Yisrael, is already the avodah of tzaddikim, which all Yidden are shaykh to this, and therefore it's b'koil d'ma madaka, it's in a more silent way. Says the Rebbe, this is what the Ramban is asking. The Ramban is asking, according to the way he sees it, im lenoi, if we're trying to focus on the beauty, if that's what Rimonim are all about, then why don't you make them apples, golden apples? That is, if the Rimonim are not just there for a certain use, as the Ramban would understand, that the bells are inside the Rimonim, etc. But if they're there, as Rashi says, just for beauty, which in Ruchnius would mean they're just there to bring out the beauty, the mile of Bnei Yisrael, then what should we be bringing out? We shouldn't be looking at them as a Rimoin, that there's these empty people and they too have mitzvahs like a Rimoin. Let's look at them completely mitzad the Pnimiyas, and therefore they are all like beautiful golden apples. They're not empty people at all. Just like in the Menorah. What happens in the menorah? We have 7 branches of the menorah. Chassidus explains to us that these 7 branches represent 7 types of oivdei Hashem. That means they're all serving Hashem. They're all part of the golden menorah. They're all like tapuchim, like beautiful apples. And this is what the Ramban is saying, that if you want to focus on the beauty, then they should be like apples rather than rimonim. Says the Rebbe, even though that bepashtus and bechitzonius, the avoida of a nishma koili, of this big commotion, is a lower avoida than the avoida of bekoil d'mamadaka. Nevertheless, the truth of the matter is that really in this avoida, serving Hashem berash with this big tumult, there is a certain maila, a certain advantage even over the avoida in bittul. That is, the avoida bekoil d'mamadaka has a certain limitation. It's finite. Yes, it's true the person is standing with bittul, but that itself is still in a way that there's a certain limitation. Chassidus refers to it as an oir, the energy inside a container, inside a keli. It's in a more settled way, in a more relaxed way. Whereas the avoid of a nishma koiloi, the avoid of a tremendous commotion, that itself shows that there are no limitations of kelim over here at all. Completely not limiting the excitement and therefore going out with shouting and calling and with big commotion. Says the Rebbe, this is actually one of the reasons that we say that Mokim Shabali Tshuva, that the place of Baal Tshuva, Tzad Gomer cannot stand there, because it's specifically in this rash and this commotion and this noise of Tshuva where you see the bligvul aspect of the neshama. Says the Rebbe, from all of this we have a hira, a special hira for our generation, Dora, the ikvus of the Mashiach. There are some people that argue and claim, yes, it's true that because of the lowliness of the situation of our generation, we do have to be involved in spreading Torah, strengthening Yiddishkeit, etc. And we can't just suffice by sitting in our own Daled Amos, even if it's Daled Amos of Torah. We can't just sit there and wait till someone will come to us and ask us to give them some Torah, to spread some Torah. Rather, we have to go outside, to the outside, and find Yidden that are far away and make them into Bali Tshuva. All fine and good, these people say. But why do we need to do all of this? But koil rash gadol, with a big commotion, with lots of noise. Why is it important to go out into the street and announce loudly that Yidden should go put on tefillin and put mezuzahs on the doors and give tzedakah, etc.? This is the kind of thing we don't find this kind of shturim, this big noise about this in previous generations. Says the Rebbe, the answer is, according to all of the simanim, according to all of the signs of the end of Masechta Soita, we clearly see that we're already in the time of Ikvus of the Mashiach, the generation at the very end of the Golus, or in the according to what we were saying before, like the Me'il, we're at the very bottom of the Me'il. And therefore we need to know that at the bottom of the Me'il, there are Pa'amoinim, there are bells. That is, that to bring these types of Yidden into holiness, Tachas Kanfei Ashchina, bring them to Hashem, was set up in a way that the way to do it is v'nishma koile, with lots of noise, with lots of commotion. In fact, as we said before, it's specifically in this noise of the Avodas HaTshuvah, as we said before, this has the greatest advantage at Bli Gvul element. Another point, says the Rebbe, when we see that in the negative side, those that go against Hashem, in the non-Yiddish side, in the commotion, as the Gemara refers to it, the commotion of the noise of Rome, that all of the inyanim of Klippa are not being done in hiding and in privacy and with quiet, but rather they are all being done with so much publicity and noise. The way to nullify that shturim of the Sitra Achra is, as the expression is, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, b'mino v'dugmaso. We need to take something of its own kind to fight it. Or as the Alter Rebbe says over there in Tanya, mineyu be'abel ishde be'narga, we take wood from the forest to make an axe, the handle of an axe to break the forest. That means we need to sometimes take those inyanim that are being seen on the other side, and by taking that same attitude, those same things that are seen from the other side, in a way of, in this context, we're making the nishma koile, that it should all be done with noise. It's specifically being done dafka there, where there is all this commotion from Rome, so to speak. This brings, as the Gemara also says, that mala oivre ritzoynei kach, if this is the way those that are going against Hashem are having peace and so on and so forth, how much more so to those that follow Hashem's ways, the Yidden will be yoshvin betach, will be sitting peacefully and calmly alad mosam on their land. Through Yitaka b'shofar kadol, the great shofar that will sound, by the koil mevaser v'omer, the one who will bring in the news of the Geula, b'korev mamash.